Hello, guys. Welcome to Psych Minds. We are reading Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before by Dr. Julie Smith. If you have not subscribed yet to the channel, do subscribe, like and share if you like. We will be continuing from where we left, which was part 5, chapter 18, Dealing with Criticism and Disapproval. Criticism and disapproval is something we all have to face at some point, but nobody ever really teaches us how to deal with it in a way that allows that feedback to enhance our life instead of destroying our self esteem. Even the anticipation of criticism or disapproval can be enough to cause a paralysis in our ability to strive for things that matter most to us. So, not having the skills to deal with criticism or disapproval in a healthy way can cost you. Now, this chapter is not about to tell you to just stop caring what anyone else thinks of you. In fact, we are built to care about how we are being perceived by those around us. Criticism can be a sign that we haven't lived up to the expectations in some way, and sometimes, but not always, can signal a risk of rejection or abandonment. So, receiving criticism will naturally trigger your stress response. That response gears us up, ready to do something about it. Historically, rejection from our community was a serious threat to our survival. These days, things are different in some ways, but similar in others. Rejection and loneliness continues to be a big threat to our health, and the brain continues doing its job of trying to keep us safe in a group. Beyond simply keeping us safe, our capacity to imagine what others might think of us is a key skill that helps us to function in the social group that we live in. We develop our sense of self and identity not only from our own experience and how we interact with others, but also through what we imagine those other people really think of us, the ideas and perceptions they might have of us. This is called the looking glass self. Cooley, 1902. So it makes sense that what I believe you think of me is going to influence what I do next. So when we try to tell ourselves to just stop caring what anyone else thinks, even if we feel a momentary boost, the impact of that is often short lived at best. People pleasing. People pleasing is more than just being nice to people. Anyone would recommend being nice to people, but people pleasing is a pattern of behavior in which you consistently put all others before yourself, even to the detriment of your own health and well being. It can leave us feeling unable to express our needs, likes, and dislikes, unable to hold boundaries or even keep ourselves safe. We say yes when actually we want and need to say no. We feel resentful of being taken advantage of, but unable to change it by asking for anything different. And the fear of disapproval never disappears because there is always the possibility of putting a foot wrong, making a wrong choice, and displeasing someone, even if that person is someone we don't like or spend time with. While it is in us all to care about the approval of our peers, people pleasing takes it much further. If we grow up in an environment in which it is not safe to disagree or express difference, if disapproval is expressed with rage or contempt, then as children we learn how to survive in that environment. Keeping other people happy becomes a survival skill that we hone and perfect throughout childhood. It is only later as adults that those behavior patterns become detrimental to our relationships. We second guess every move we make, always tentatively trying to work out what others are expecting of us. It may even prevent us from making new connections as we hold back on interactions when there is no guarantee that the other person likes us back. Living a life of pleasing people is further complicated by the fact that other people don't always voice their disapproval with criticism. We can fear and feel disapproval even when the other person never says a word. When we don't have that information, our mind starts to fill in the blanks for us. The spotlight of humans to The spotlight effect is a term originally coined by Thomas Gilovich and Kenneth Savitsky, 2000, to describe the tendency of humans to overestimate how much others are focused on us. We are each at the center of our own spotlights of attention, and we tend to imagine that others are focused on us too. When in reality, everyone's spotlight are usually on themselves. So we can often make the assumption that others are judging us negatively or disapproving when they may not be thinking about us at all. Those who feel socially anxious and to focus their attention more on how they are being perceived by those around them. Clark and Wells, 1995. But those who feel more confident and to have a more outward focus of attention, leading with their curiosity for other people. So, if we have this brain that is set up to care a great deal what everyone else is thinking, or maybe we notice a tendency towards people pleasing patterns, how do we live alongside that? How do we ensure that we can have those meaningful relationships but not become trapped by constant worries about disapprovals and judgments? And how can we pick ourselves back up when disapproval from someone else stops us from living in line with what matters to us? The tasks of dealing with criticism. Building up the ability to tolerate the criticism that could be helpful and use it to your advantage while maintaining a sense of self worth. Being open to learning from negative feedback that could help you make progress. Learning to let go of criticism that reflect the values of someone else rather than your own. Getting clarity on which opinions matter the most to you and why, so that it becomes easier to know when to reflect and learn and when to let go and move on. Understanding people. Most people who are highly critical of others tend to be highly critical of themselves also. It can reflect the way they have learned to speak to themselves and everyone else. They criticize because it is what they do, not necessarily because it is any reflection on your worthiness as a human being, especially when it is a very personal attack on your character as opposed to anything that could be in any way helpful to you on your path. As humans, we also have a tendency towards egocentric thinking, which can play out in our insistence that other people live by the same values and obey the same rules that we have set for ourselves. This means that criticism can often be based on the critical person's view of the world, neglecting the fact that we all have different life experiences, values, and personalities. Understanding that people tend to criticize others based on their own rules for living is helpful to remember, especially for anyone with that tendency towards people pleasing. We want everyone's approval, but if each person is unique with their own ideas and views, then we simply cannot please everyone all the time. If we have a close relationship with the person, then we are likely to value their opinions more, which can make the criticism more painful. But we also may have the insight to better understand what lies behind the disapproval. Context is everything, but we don't always have access to it. When we don't have that context, it is much harder to see the criticism for what it is. One person's idea that is wrapped up in their own experiences. The natural instinct is to take on the criticism as a factual statement that says something about who we are and to start questioning our own self worth. Nurturing self worth. Not all criticism is bad. When feedback focuses on a specific behavior, we tend to feel guilty, which prompts us to correct our mistakes, to repair the relationship. When criticism attacks our personality and our sense of worth as a person, we tend to feel it in the form of shame. Shame is the intensely painful feeling that can be mixed with other emotions like anger or disgust. It is different from embarrassment, which is less intense and tends to be felt in public. Shame is much more painful. We feel unable to speak, think clearly, or do anything. We want to disappear and hide. The sheer intensity of the physical reaction makes it difficult to recover from. Shame triggers our threat system in such a way that it can feel like someone held a match to all our other emotions. So we get a rush of anger, fear, or disgust to go along with it. Then the self attack comes swarming in like soldiers over a hill, coming at you with self criticism, self denigration, and blame. With that sort of onslaught, the instinct is to block it all out. But shame is not easy to ignore. So we go for the most absorbing, addictive behavior that offers instant relief. Shame resilience is something we can learn, but it is a life practice. Building resilience to shame does not mean you never feel it. Instead, it means we learn how to dust ourselves off and get back up. Being able to experience shame and come back from it without losing your sense of self worth involves getting to know what triggers shame for you. There are certain aspects of our lives and things we do that we perceive to be part of who we are. That may be parenting or physical appearance or creativity. Anything that you link to your self worth can give rise to shame. In order to build and maintain a sense of self worth, we need to understand that our worthiness as a human being is not dependent on living mistake free. Second, reality checking the criticism and all the judgments that follow. Whether it comes from someone else or inside your own head, judgments and opinions are not facts. They are narratives and stories that can significantly change our experience of the world. So, looking after your self worth involves taking the name calling and personal attacks out of the equation and focusing on the specific concrete behaviors and their consequences. Reminding yourself that being imperfect, making mistakes, or failing is all a part of being human. Making friends with your fallibility means that when you do fail, you don't have to feel worthless. You can use each experience to your advantage by learning from it. Minding what you say. Third, criticism will always hurt a little. That is our brain doing its best to keep us safe. There is no antidote that makes it all okay forever and ever. Criticisms bouncing off your armor. What use is armor anyway when the worst critic is in your own head? A harsh comment or criticism can leave you feeling winded. Of course, naturally, you then spend the next 5 hours rehearsing it again in your head. The brain wants to pay attention to it because it is a threat. But each time you go over it in your mind, the stress response is triggered again. So one kick in the stomach can feel more like 100 kicks in the stomach. Time spent thinking over a helpful criticism that we can put to good use and that adds to the work we are doing in the world is time well spent. Ruminating and churning over a nasty comment with no sense of how this can help you is just a continuation of the attack on your character. Next, talking to yourself in the right way after a criticism. This is vital if you want to have the capacity to move through shame and bounce back. When we are in shame, we may feel a sense of self loathing and we convince ourselves that we need to continue the attack. The idea of responding to ourselves with respect and compassion feels undeserved and indulgent, as if it would let you off the hook and stop you bothering to try harder. But in reality, if you want a man to get up off the ground, you have to stop beating him. The key to using all criticism to your advantage is having your own back. You have so much compassion, so much self compassion that you are able to listen to criticism and decide which of that criticism you will take on board and use to your advantage as a learning experience, and which voices offer you nothing but dents in your self esteem and crushed confidence. Talking about shame itself. Reach out to someone you trust and confide in. Secrets, silence, and judgments intensify shame. Sharing our experience with someone who responds with empathy helps us to leave shame behind and move on. Understanding you. Living the life you want to live in the face of criticism means getting clear on 1. The opinions that truly matter to you and why. Whose opinions matter most to you? Saying I don't care what anyone thinks is rarely true and hides a world of insecurities. It stops us creating meaningful connections with others because it closes off any avenue of communication in which both voices matter. But the list of whose opinions truly matter needs to be small. It is also worth pointing out that acknowledging who matters does not mean it is your responsibility to please them. It just means you are willing to listen to their feedback even when it is not praise, because you know it is likely to be honest and in your best interest, therefore most likely to be helpful. Second, why you do what you do. The one person you most need the approval of is you. When the way you we are living is out of line with our values and what matters most, life stops feeling meaningful or satisfying. Understanding the kind of person you want to be and how you want to live your life, how you want to contribute to the world, is the road you want to stay close to. When you know exactly who you are and who you want to be, it is much easier to choose which criticisms to take on board and which ones to let go. Where those familiar critical voices are really coming from and whether they are warranted and helpful or detrimental to our well being. When there is someone in your life who is predictably critical, you hear their voice before they even say anything. Over time, we internalize their constant criticism so that it becomes the way we speak to ourselves. So, we may be highly self critical because we have learned to be. Recognizing that we learn that way of speaking to ourselves helps us to acknowledge that we can relearn a new internal dialogue that serves us better. Chapter summary. Learning the skills to deal with criticism and disapproval in a healthy way is a crucial life skill. We are built to care what others think of us, so telling ourselves that we don't care is not the answer. People pleasing is more than just being nice to people, it is the persistent placing of others' wants and needs above your own, even to the detriment of your own health and well being. Understanding why some people are highly critical helps. Nurturing your own self worth and resilience to shame is both possible and potentially life altering. That brings us to the end of the chapter, chapter 19. Next. The key to building confidence. As a teenager growing up in a small town, I thought of myself as a confident person. Then I left that small town and went off to university over 100 miles away. But much of my confidence, which I thought was part of me, stayed at home. I was vulnerable, unsure of myself, not clear on who I needed to be fit in. Over time, university life became the new normal and I built up my confidence brick by brick once again. After I graduated, I got a job as a researcher for an addiction service. Feeling confident to meet the demands of university was no longer enough. I needed to tolerate the vulnerable feeling once again in order to build up confidence in this new arena. The same happened when I began my clinical training, then after qualification, after the birth of my first child, when I started my own practice, and again when I started making my work public on social media. With every turn I have ever made, the confidence that once seemed enough suddenly seems inadequate and vulnerability returns. Confidence is like a home that you build for yourself. When you go somewhere new, you must build a new one. But when we do, we are not starting from scratch. Every time we step into the unknown and try something new, experience that vulnerability, make mistakes, get through them, and build some confidence. We move on to the next chapter with evidence that we can get through tough challenges. We bring with us the courage we need to take that leap of faith again and again. That same leap of faith the trapeze artist must take every time she lets go of one bar before grabbing the next one. She is always vulnerable, never completely safe, but each time she tries, she knows she can meet that risk with the courage needed to make it happen. To build confidence, go where you have none. Confidence is not same as comfortable. One of the biggest misconception about becoming self-confident is that it means living fearlessly. The key to building confidence is quite the opposite. It means we are willing to let fear be present as we do the things that matter to us. When we establish some self confidence in something, it feels good. We want to stay there and hold on to it. But if we only go where we feel confident, then confidence never expands beyond that. If we only do things we know we can do well, fear of the new and unknown tends to grow. Building confidence inevitably demands that we make friends with vulnerability because it is the only way to be without confidence for a while. But the only way confidence can grow is when we are willing to be without it, when we can step into fear and sit with the unknown. It is the courage of doing so that builds confidence from the ground up. Courage comes first, confidence comes seconds. This doesn't mean that we have to dive in at the emotional deep end and risk overwhelming ourselves. But it does not mean that we must recognize how fear helps us to perform at our best and that we need to change our relationship with that fear so that we no longer need to eliminate it before we try. We learn to take fear with us. Here is the learning model Luckner and Nadler 1991 that we can use as a guide for building confidence. Note down what aspects of your life might be in comfort zone, what tasks feel challenging but manageable, and which things you would put in the panic zone. Every time you step into the stretch zone, you are doing the work of building your confidence by flexing your courage. When you are trying to build self confidence, it is a process of building self acceptance, self compassion, and learning the value in vulnerability and fear. It is often a balancing act that doesn't always feel easy. Along the way, all of the tools in this book can be used as they can each help to build up your capacity to both lean into effort and tolerate the discomfort, then pull back and replenish. Comfort zone, stretch zone, then panic zone. The Learning Model by Luckner Nadler, 1991. Some of the main ingredients for that leap of faith we need for stepping into the stretch zones are recognition that you can improve with effort, willingness to tolerate the discomfort of being vulnerable for a while, the commitment to yourself that you will always have your own back and do the best by yourself whether you succeed or fail. This means embracing self compassion as a life practice and being your own coach, not your worst critic. Understanding how to move through the shame that can arise from failure to prevent our tendency to quit on our dreams in an effort to avoid the shame of a setback. See section 3 for more on this. To build confidence, we don't have to live in fear. We have to develop a daily pattern of stepping into fear, sitting with it and stepping back out, giving ourselves time to recover and replenish, ready for tomorrow. See section 6 on fear. Ah, okay. Why you don't need to work on your self esteem. There is a whole industry built on the concept of self esteem and the idea that if we can just believe in ourselves, we will perform better and improve our relationships and our overall happiness in life. Self esteem generally means being able to evaluate yourself positively and believe in those appraisals. Harris 2010. So, anyone trying to help you increase your self esteem might ask you to list what you like about yourself and what your strengths are and try to convince you to believe that you can become a success in the world. But we have a problem with the concept of success. We link it to the idea of wealth, winning, standing out, and being acknowledged by others. So, how do you know if you are winning? You compare yourself to others. Maybe you go online and pick any of the 4.6 billion internet users from across the world. With a pool that size, you are guaranteed to find someone who is doing better than you at something. When you do, self-esteem might take a hit because if you are not the winner, you can start to see yourself as a loser instead. What if you stay offline and only compare yourself to your friends and family instead? Doing that is not going to nurture healthy relationships. Associating a measure of success to worthiness would inevitably make it difficult to truly connect with the people you are comparing yourself to. What happens when you lose your job and your friend gets a promotion? A review of the research by a group of psychologists showed that high self esteem is not linked with better relationships or better performance, but it does correlate with arrogance, prejudice, and discrimination. Baumeister et al. 2003. They found no significant evidence that trying to boost self esteem through intervention had any benefits. Self esteem cannot be relied on when it is contingent on being a success. It is psychological rent that you can never stop paying. The second you notice signs that you might be less than, you brand yourself as not enough. So you keep running on a hamster wheel of success, driven by a scarcity mindset and the fear of being inadequate. Ditch the positive affirmations. You cannot open a social media platform without coming across an offering of daily affirmations. The idea behind this is that if you say something to yourself enough times, you will start to believe it and become it. But as it turns out, things aren't quite that simple. For those who already have high self esteem and believe in themselves, repeating affirmations can have a small benefit of feeling a little better. But some studies have shown that for people with low self esteem, repeating affirmations and statements that they don't believe, for example, I'm strong, I'm lovable, or being asked to focus on all the reasons that statement is true, tended to make them feel worse. Wood et al. 2009. The reason for this may be that internal dialogue we all have. If you say out loud that you are strong and lovable, but you don't believe that you are, then your inner critic will get to work coming up with all the reasons why you are not strong or lovable. The result is an internal battle and plenty of time to focus on all the narratives that bring you down while you are desperately trying to push them away. So, what works instead? Well, the study I previously mentioned found that when those with low self esteem were told it is okay to experience negative thoughts, their moods improved. They no longer had to battle with trying to convince themselves of something they didn't yet believe. Therefore, on the days when we don't feel strong, we don't need to tell ourselves that we are. We can acknowledge that feeling. This way sometimes is a part of being human. We can respond to it with compassion and encouragement. We can then turn to the things that help us to feel confident in our own strength again by using all the tools at our disposal to move through tough times in line with the person we want to be. The way that we start to believe something more positive about ourselves is to use actions to create evidence for it. While affirmations may not be the best strategy for those with low self esteem, words still matter. If mistakes and failures lead to an onslaught of onslaught, do not let any of it go unchecked. Professional athletes have professional coaches for a reason. In day to day life, we don't have that, so we must be the voice for ourselves. The natural emotional response to failure influences our thoughts and makes us more vulnerable to self criticism. So we can't always stop it, but we can respond to it with an alternative that serves us better. To build confidence, you have to get to work being your own coach instead of your own worst critic. That includes responding to failure in a way that will help you to get up, dust yourself off, and get back out there. A professional coach would not bully you with words or chant affirmations that you couldn't believe in. They bring honesty, accountability, unconditional encouragement, and support. They are in your corner, whatever the score, with your best interest at heart. Doing that for yourself is not always easy, but it is a life skill that we can improve on with practice. Toolkit is changing your relationship with fear to build confidence. To begin building confidence in something that makes you feel nervous, you can practice welcoming the sensation of fear and sitting with them without pushing them away. To do this, we don't have to put ourselves in a situation that causes intense panic or terror. In fact, that is not advisable. Instead, we can practice by dipping a toe in the water, stepping slightly out of that comfort zone just enough that you can feel the stress response without feeling overwhelmed. Write down the situation in which you would like to build more confidence, but the most vulnerable situation at the top. Then list any variations of that situation that may feel more manageable but still challenging. For example, if I want to build my confidence in social situations, I may put parties at the top of the list as the occasion in which I feel least confident. Slightly easier than that might be a party at which I know everyone. Easier than that might be a small gathering of close friends. Easier still might be going to a cafe with a trusted friend. Once you have your list, you don't start at the top. You take the scenario that presents a challenge but still feels possible. You then repeat that behavior as often as you can. Once your confidence grows and the situation becomes a comfort zone, you move up to the next thing on the list. The Perfect Nurturer is a tool originally developed by Paul Gilbert and Deborah Lee and used in compassion focused therapy (CFT). It can be a helpful way to turn your focus towards the self talk you need when building your confidence. A perfect nurturer is an image of a person that you can return to in order to feel safe and nurtured when that is what you need. If you prefer the idea of a coach, you can use that instead. Create an image in your mind of the perfect nurturer or coach. This could be a real or imagined person. Imagine you are sharing with them what you are currently facing, how you feel about it, and what you want to work on. Take some time to imagine in detail how that perfect nurturer or coach might respond and write it down. This sets the tone for the words you can start using to respond to yourself as you work on building your own confidence and inevitably face vulnerability along the way. That brings us to the end of this chapter. Chapter summary. Confidence cannot grow if we are never willing to be without it. To build confidence, go where you have none. Repeat every day and watch your confidence develop. Confidence is situation specific, but what you keep as you move around is the belief that you can tolerate the fear as confidence grows. You do not need to overwhelm yourself with your worst case scenario. Start with small changes. Along the way, be your own coach, not your worst critic. Courage comes before confidence. We will continue with the next reading, chapter 20, You Are Not Your Mistakes, in our next reading, which would be mostly tomorrow. If you have any questions, any suggestions, any recommendations, anything at all, you can write down in the comment section of the video you're viewing or in the community section of the YouTube channel. If you have not liked, do like, share, and subscribe if you like. And do check out the other books that I have read in the playlist section of the YouTube channel. Bye bye for now. Keep reading. Take care.